And now, the Everfree Network presents A Shower of Stars by Caerdwyn. Read for you by DustyKatt. With Meredith Sims, Alioopster, Rev, Hannah May, Jen McGregor, and Tay. Music by Caerdwyn. Produced by RobBob. And edited by One Trick. Chapter 1. Dinner Flight. Marvel not, if the family of heaven still dazzle thee. It is a messenger that comes to invite all to ascend. Dante Alighieri. Twilight was hanging on for dear life.
Whoa, whoa!
As a longtime resident of Camelot, favored by the Princess Celestia almost as an apprentice, Twilight had often ridden Pegasus chariots reserved for the elite. It was among the best ways for ponies without wings to travel, and had never been a frightening experience. But then, she had never ridden a chariot pulled by Rainbow Dash.
Slow down!
Twilight pleaded, as she wrapped her forelegs around the guardrail of the passenger cockpit.
This is just a prototype!
As if on cue, one of the running lights tore free from the yoke and fell, hopefully to land somewhere uninhabited. The outskirts of Camelot were almost a mile below, and Twilight was also worried about the effects of altitude on the spells she had cast upon the chariot. The panicked words were all but lost in the wind noise, though, and Twilight resorted to grabbing Rainbow Dash's tail in her teeth and tugging to get the headstrong pony's attention.
Oh, all right.
Rainbow Dash grumbled, easing her pace.
I just wanted to see how much drag your performance chariot generated. That's all.
She looked back over her shoulder and laughed.
You can let go of my tail now.
Twilight released her driver's tail and gingerly stood up in the chariot, noting with dismay where cracks in the framework had appeared. At least the wheels hadn't fallen off, and the passenger platform was intact.
Next time, I'm going to bring a parachute, and some reins, and a buggy whip.
Rainbow Dash snorted in response.
The Pegasus guards don't have reins.
The Pegasus guards have self-control. You can bet that they have to show restraint when they pull a princess. They're orderly and professional and disciplined. You'd hate it. Why in the world would you want to be a Pegasus guard anyway?
Because they have cool armor. And they get to kick butts when ponies get in the princess's face too much.
Rainbow Dash made a little bucking motion, causing her passenger to duck. Twilight sighed and shook her wind-tousled mane.
When have you ever heard of the guard actually kicking butts? They're soldiers, not bouncers at a nightclub.
Yeah, well, I'm really doing this because I saw the Wonderbolts pulling stunt ponies on air skis once. If they know how to tow, I gotta know too. Besides,
Rainbow Dash said with a rarity-like toss of her head,
Princess Celestia said I was the best flyer in Equestria. She might want to get somewhere in a hurry someday, and might want to look cool doing it too, you know.
She accelerated for a moment, just enough to allow her rainbow trail to manifest. A splintering sound interrupted Rainbow Dash, and Twilight watched with dismay as a wheel fender and a few inches of guardrail fell away. Twilight's horn glowed a moment as she telekinetically snatched the fragments of the chariot before they were lost.
I'm going to need air skis if this thing falls apart. The integrity spell is damaged, and the frame is too light to hold together without it. Can we land gently, please?
Sure.
Rainbow Dash replied as she began a slow, spiraling descent.
I'm getting hungry anyway. Hauling you around is hard work.
Twilight almost snorted at the mention of hard work from Rainbow Dash, but managed to keep quiet. Rainbow Dash did indeed put a great deal of effort into perfecting her flying skills. Credit where credit is due, as the saying went. Twilight pointed a hoof downward at the plaza near the royal palace.
There are some wonderful places to eat there. My treat.
Rainbow Dash laughed.
Ha! Those are the magic words!
Several minutes passed with the chariot slowly coming apart. The sun was setting, its light reddening upon the west walls of Camelot. Twilight's horn glowed as she kept the chariot together, reinforcing the failing integrity spell. It was not difficult, as the spell was already in place. It just needed active management. As they approached the plaza, a mail-clad Pegasus flew up to meet them, banking around to parallel the chariot.
This is restricted airspace. You must... Oh, it's you, Miss Sparkle.
The Pegasus guard pointedly ignored Rainbow Dash.
Do you need help landing your... vehicle?
Oh, hello, Lieutenant Cloudmane.
Twilight replied.
I think things are under control. Thank you, though.
Hey, am I invisible?
Rainbow Dash started to protest the snub, but then recognized the guard pony. It was one of the soldiers whom she had taunted weeks ago in Ponyville. She silenced herself and flew sulkily ahead, making a show of ignoring the guard as surely as he was ignoring her. The guard nodded his head to Twilight in a small bow.
My pleasure, ma'am. Welcome back to Canterlot.
He saluted Twilight with a forehoof, glared distastefully at Rainbow Dash, then turned away toward the palace. After the guard was out of earshot, Rainbow Dash asked.
You know Mr. Stuffy Pants?
Of course I do.
Twilight said.
There aren't that many.
He paused a moment to straighten one of the wheels, which threatened to come off of its hub. A brief sparkle of her horn marking the magic in action.
That many guards at the palace grounds. He used to be assigned to the Royal Observatory when I was in Celestia school.
Twilight grinned impishly at Rainbow Dash.
Why? Would you like me to introduce you? As far as I know, he's single.
No, we've met.
Rainbow Dash sullenly replied.
Now, let me concentrate. We're about to land.
She was quiet for a few moments as she lined up her approach to the plaza, their slower speed turning the thermal buffeting of the sun-warmed evening air from sharp jolts to gentle bounces. The light crosswind was corrected for by lowering her upwind wing and steering slightly into the breeze. The plaza ahead was sparsely populated. There was plenty of room. Rainbow Dash cupped her wings, shedding speed for more lift and a slower sink rate. The cobbled pavement loomed below them as they approached the ground. Twilight braced herself. The landing was surprisingly gentle. For all her bluster and experience with pulling carts and chariots, Rainbow Dash did know how to fly well. The chariot's wheels touched, then Rainbow Dash's hooves. 3 powerful reversed wing flaps brought them to rest. As soon as the chariot came to a halt, Twilight relaxed. The spell binding the chariot together evaporated, and with a clatter, the chariot collapsed into a heap all around Twilight. Rainbow Dash grinned saucily at her, and then shrugged out of the harness.
Any landing that you can walk away from is a good landing. Now, let's eat.
Twilight and Rainbow Dash sat at an outdoor table covered with a red and white checkered tablecloth. Before them, the crusts of a veggie combo super deluxe pizza were all that was left of their dinner. Twilight had been right. Mama Gazpacho's, though somewhat fancy as pizza parlors go, was excellent, and both Twilight and Rainbow Dash enjoyed eating outdoors. The night sky was starting to show after a spectacular sunset. Tonight was the night of the new moon, and the stars were especially brilliant. Already, there had been several dazzling shooting stars, much to Twilight's surprise. Her astronomical ephemeris had said nothing about meteors to this date. Even Rainbow Dash, normally unimpressed by natural displays, was entranced by the streaks of light. Both ponies found themselves intently watching the sky for more.
Well, hello, my faithful student. And you also, Rainbow Dash.
Twilight and Rainbow Dash leapt in surprise to their feet, having not heard anyone approaching. They turned to face the elegant white alicorn, who had quietly alighted behind them. They both bowed deeply, as did the restaurant's waitstaff and other customers. Princess Celestia nodded in acceptance of the formal greeting, then smiled at the 2 ponies.
I was informed of your visit. I'm glad I caught you before you left.
She moved her head slightly, her long horn indicating a guard Pegasus standing at the patio gate. As she turned back to the 2 at the table, the guard stuck out his tongue at Rainbow Dash, who gaped in surprise. Lieutenant Cloudmane chuckled quietly, muttering something about sauces and geese. Twilight and Rainbow Dash quickly invited Celestia to join them. Celestia sat at the table, a purple cushion placed under her by the waiter just before the royal rump met the ground.
Are you here for the falling stars?
Celestia asked. As she spoke, another waiter set desserts before all 3, unbidden. The house specialty, baklava, a sweet, nutty, flaky pastry atop a bed of shamrock-like wood sorrel.
We were, just in the area, testing something,
said Twilight. In the nearby street, the civic maintenance ponies were loading the last of the remains of the chariot into a cart to be hauled back to Ponyville Library for a post-mortem. Celestia was politely pretending to not draw a conclusion between the test and the results, though Twilight knew Celestia well enough to be certain that she would have immediately come to an accurate conclusion. Twilight felt the need to change the subject.
I didn't know there was a meteor shower tonight, but this would be a great place to watch them from.
The cafe's patio had a splendid view of the sky in the nearby palace, and Celestia nodded agreement.
Luna's particularly excited about the shower. She informed me that there would likely be a starfall tonight, then excused herself to the observatory earlier this afternoon. I believe she's been there ever since.
Celestia lowered her head as she magicked the dessert up and began nibbling at it. Twilight and Rainbow Dash immediately began on their own, protocol and manners having been satisfied by waiting for the princess to start eating first. The other patrons of the restaurant returned to their meals, and the waiters to their duties.
It's good to see her so interested in things like this.
Celestia continued.
My sister is turning into quite the little bookworm. I may need to send her to Ponyville to make some friends, though.
She winked at Twilight, who blushed. Celestia then turned to Rainbow Dash.
And what of you, my favored flyer?
Oh!
Said Rainbow Dash, a little startled. She had been keeping her silence, intimidated by, and a little jealous of, the camaraderie between Twilight and Celestia.
Well, Your Majesty, I've been working on my flying. That's kind of why we're here. Twilight was helping me.
She trailed off for a moment, as the results had not been brag-worthy, then hastily went on.
I gotta be as good as I can if I want to get into the Wonderbolt someday.
Celestia laughed merrily.
Oh, I have no doubt that you will. But there's so much more to being a Wonderbolt than flight skills.
Rainbow Dash looked a little puzzled.
What do you mean, Princess?
She suddenly stopped and stared. Overhead, behind Celestia, a tight formation of Pegasus ponies streaked across the sky from the direction of Cloudsdale. Marker lights attached to ankle bands on their hooves, showing the group clearly. It was the Alpha team of the Wonderbolts, and they were in a hurry, heading toward the Royal Palace. Celestia, curious as to what had Rainbow Dash's attention, turned and watched the flight squad as they landed on a balcony on the upper reaches of a tower into which Twilight had never been allowed.
What a strange coincidence,
she said mildly, but there was a slight frown of worry on Celestia's face, a frown which intensified as another Pegasus guard flew down from the palace to the restaurant patio. The guard's bow was hasty, and without waiting for the princess to prompt him, he immediately leaned forward to whisper into the princess's ear. Twilight and Rainbow Dash looked quizzically at each other. There was an uncomfortably long, hushed exchange between the princess and the guard. Celestia then stood and turned to face the palace. She looked back over her shoulder, her manner having suddenly become aloof and formal.
I am afraid I am needed elsewhere.
A chill went down Twilight's spine. She had seen the princess like this before, and it always had preceded something serious. Celestia continued as she spread her wings.
Until I see you again, I hope you are...
Celestia stopped, paused a long moment as she considered Twilight and Rainbow Dash, then said,
Actually, would you both join me? After you have finished your desserts. I may need your help.
Twilight and Rainbow Dash both took a moment to absorb that. Almost in unison, they answered,
Yes, Princess!
Celestia dipped her horn.
Thank you. I will send someone to fetch you.
Twilight and Rainbow Dash bowed as Celestia took flight along with her escorts. Almost as if on cue, a meteor overhead left a glowing trail, then flared as it silently burst into nothingness. Rainbow Dash pranced a moment in excitement at having been personally asked to help the princess over a mysterious matter.
She needs us! She needs us!
That excitement quickly turned to nervousness as she saw the concern on Twilight's face and the implications sank in.
Wait a minute! Why would she need us?
Rainbow Dash's usual self-assured attitude was suddenly gone, as visions of dragons filled her mind. Twilight shook her head.
I don't know.
But her eyes followed Celestia into the distance. The princess was heading not to the palace, but to the observatory. Chapter 2. Fly Me to the Moon. The stars with deep amaze stand fit in steadfast gaze, bending one way their precious influence, and will not take their flight. John Milton. It did not take long before the promised messenger arrived. She introduced herself as Nimbus, and led Rainbow Dash and Twilight on the ground in deference to Twilight's lack of wings. Nimbus was a white-maned Pegasus with a pale blue color. On her haunch was a stylized fireworks rocket, and she was a few years older than the ponies she had been sent to guide. As Twilight had suspected, their destination was the dome of the observatory. The shutters were wide open, and the inside was darkened. The building was silhouetted against the starry sky, dramatically framed by the flaring trails of meteors. Twilight tried to ask the messenger what she knew about the princess's summons, but Nimbus would only reply,
I'm not at liberty to say.
Nimbus had an air of detached formality about her, a mannerism which Twilight found somewhat impersonal. Her manners and eloquence were, however, unquestionable. Nimbus had her own questions, though, primarily for Rainbow Dash. Apparently, Nimbus had heard more about Rainbow Dash than about Twilight, and Rainbow Dash was certainly in a more talkative mood. Twilight was content to listen quietly to the others' conversation.
I saw your performance at the Young Flyer competition.
Nimbus was saying.
Spectacular, if I may say so.
Thanks!
Said Rainbow Dash, a little strut coming to her steps.
I was nervous at first. Well, just a little nervous anyway.
Both Twilight and Nimbus laughed, though perhaps for different reasons.
A little, yes.
Nimbus replied.
It takes some getting used to being stared at like that by that many ponies. Funny how it doesn't matter who's watching when things turn serious, though, wouldn't you say?
Yeah!
Laughed Rainbow Dash.
Let me guess. You entered the Young Flyers competition too?
Nimbus shook her head.
I was too afraid to fly competitively back then. You're a leg up on me in that regard. I got started late.
Rainbow Dash was going to ask what that meant, but at that moment, they arrived at the gates of the observatory grounds. There were 2 of the palace guards, unicorn guards, Twilight and Rainbow Dash noticed, at the gates. Twilight looked puzzled, as the observatory was not normally considered sensitive, even when there was a princess using the instruments. The guards saluted, and one said, "They are waiting you inside, Lieutenant Firestreak."
Fire!
Rainbow Dash froze in mid-step, her wings splaying.
Nimbus Firestreak? Oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my glurk!
Twilight stuffed a hoof into Rainbow Dash's mouth. Nimbus turned around, a silent question on her face. Twilight giggled and asked,
I'm going to guess you're a member of the Wonderbolts.
Nimbus nodded and grinned.
Their most junior member, actually. Beta team alternate. And occasional errand pony when I'm out of uniform.
Twilight cautiously withdrew her hoof, ready to put it back if needed. Rainbow Dash was, fortunately, in the speechless phase of her hero shock. Nimbus took advantage of the moment.
I need to go.
Nimbus said.
The princesses await you, and my uniform awaits me. Perhaps I'll see you later tonight?
She said to Rainbow Dash. A little squee was the only answer. Nimbus laughed, waved a hoof in farewell to Twilight, then leapt into the air and headed toward the tower which the other Wonderbolts had flown earlier. Twilight had to practically drag Rainbow Dash into the observatory by her tail.
Come on, Rainbow! Move it!
Twilight glanced around as she entered the observation dome. Things had changed since last she was here. The myriad of smaller instruments, some of which she had duplicates of back in Ponyville Library, had been replaced by a single powerful telescope with a brass gear-festooned tracking mechanism. The oaken floor was as lovingly polished as ever, though, and the elegant, high-precision clock was the same as she remembered. A table with books and scrolls was next to the clock, along with an assortment of writing and calculating instruments. Dim marker lights provided enough illumination for visitors to get about without tripping, and a single shaded lamp on the desk created a small pool of light. 2 more palace guards, unicorns like the ones outside, waited quietly and alertly next to the curved dome wall. The 2 princesses stood on one side, speaking quietly. It was obvious that Luna was upset. Her head was down and her wings extended low. She seemed like she wanted to hide somewhere. Celestia looked up at Twilight and Rainbow Dash, then beckoned them over.
Your Majesties,
Twilight said, as she and Rainbow Dash made small curtsies.
what can we help you with?
Thank you for coming.
Celestia looked over at Luna.
We need to have something verified. Sister, would you show our friends what you showed me?
Luna took a deep breath, then stepped over to the telescope. She looked up at the slice of sky the open domed shutter exposed. Another pair of glowing plasma trails appeared, then faded. Luna's horn shone dimly for a moment, and the telescope slewed toward what appeared to be the center of the falling stars. She glanced at the telescope's coordinate rings, looked into the eyepiece for a moment, then stepped back.
Please, look.
Twilight peered into the eyepiece, then gasped.
I've never seen anything like it! That's beautiful! What are they?
Before Luna could answer, Rainbow Dash bumped Twilight aside.
Let me see!
Rainbow Dash looked through the telescope, then drew in a deep breath. There were many, many more stars that she could not have seen with the naked eye. They sparkled like a handful of diamonds cast into the night. As her vision adjusted to the dark, she could see washes of faint purple and pink, wispy clouds that she instinctively knew no Pegasus would ever touch. The sight was soul-stirring, but it was not the stars or the star clouds which held attention. Within the field of view were 3 intense motes of light, each surrounded by a glittering cluster of dim red sparks like tightly packed swarms of fireflies.
Wow!
She said.
That's awesome!
Those aren't comets.
Twilight said, but not in the self-satisfied voice she usually used when lecturing ponies on matters of magic and science. She was more subdued than normal.
Are these why you asked us here, Princess?
Luna nodded.
Look again. Look carefully.
She was obviously trying to not suggest what to look for, not trying to lead the ponies to any particular conclusion. Twilight again approached the telescope, but Rainbow Dash stubbornly would not move away from the eyepiece.
Hey! I can see them moving!
Rainbow Dash exclaimed. Indeed, the telescope itself was very slowly in motion, tracking the objects. Twilight looked startled.
That must mean they're very close.
She said. Luna and Celestia glanced at each other, then back to Twilight. There was a sudden sinking feeling in the pit of Twilight's stomach. She asked Luna.
Princess, do you have tracking data from earlier?
Luna's horn glowed, and a notebook with neatly recorded coordinates levitated up and hovered before Twilight. Twilight looked at the telescope's coordinate rings to see precisely where it was currently aimed, then at the nearby clock, then back at the numbers within the book. She began calculating, her own horn aglow as a pencil scrawled equations in the margins of the notebook, accompanied by a slide rule that rapidly generated numbers in response to Twilight's manipulation. Twilight was muttering.
The radial delta, now take the cosine, an eccentricity greater than 1? That's hyperbolic! Okay, that means solve for intersections.
The others watched pensively. Even Rainbow Dash knew that something serious was happening, though she had no idea what. She felt irritable, largely because she knew that this was all way over her head, both literally and intellectually. She did not have long to wait for an explanation, though. Twilight suddenly let out a gasp, putting a hoof over her mouth.
What?
Rainbow Dash demanded.
Just before the dawn?
Asked Luna.
Yes, Princess. About 2 hours before sunrise,
Said Twilight in a hushed voice. Rainbow Dash nudged Twilight.
What is it?
Celestia closed her eyes, a ripple of sparks flowing down her ghostly mane.
So you were right, Luna. Forgive me for not acting earlier. I had to be sure.
What?
Rainbow Dash cried out, her frustration overwhelming her restraint in the presence of royalty. Twilight turned her eyes, filled with dread upon her friend.
the meteors, whatever they are, they're going to hit Equestria tonight.
Luna, her head again lowered, added in a barely audible voice.
And it's my fault.